We were sent out to the end of a long driveway by ourselves to catch the school bus. And the school bus pulled up. And this was the year that my family lived out in the country, and the school bus for the first 6 months of the year was driven by a man named Jimmy, who was lanky and had huge shoes with holes in the soles, and the toes were repaired with duct tape, and wild black hair and unshaven. He gave us a haunted look as he opened the school bus door, and we walked up the little well past him, and we said, "Good morning, Jimmy." Jimmy was a man who smoked a cigarette as he drove the school bus. And he held a coffee cup in his other hand. So he steered the bus with his knees. He kept a bottle under the seat that he used to flavor the coffee with. He smoked and he drank and he steered with his knees, and you stood there waiting for the bus to come. You were sent out there on a snowy morning. They never closed the schools. Even if 14 inches of snow fell and you could barely see, you struggled through the drifts down to the end of the driveway, lest you should become soft. You were sent out there to catch the bus, and it came up out of the blizzard toward you, and it skidded, the rear end skidded slightly as he put on the brakes and opened the door, and there was Jimmy sitting there, cigarette, coffee cup. It was exciting. Jimmy was sort of a glimpse for us into an adult world that you wouldn't get to see in Boy Scouts. Jimmy looked up at us in the rearview mirror, and he said, "Any of you kids report me for smoking on the bus, believe me, I'll be able to find out who done it. And I'll find you, and boy, you will be sorry. Because this is the first job I had since I was let out of prison. Any of you kids spoils this for me, well, I'll be seeing you later." Sometimes he'd get lost in those 5 miles between my driveway and town, and we'd wind up all over driving around. We didn't care. And we didn't report him either, because we knew that when we came in late to school, it was our fault. It was not the school's fault. He was somebody's nephew. That's how he got the job. They didn't have tests for this sort of thing back then. He had a radio. That's the first place I ever heard low-down music was off that radio on that school bus. Him sitting there steering with his knees, smoking, drinking coffee, a little flavoring out of a bottle. "You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love drives a man insane. You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire." He had magazines under his seat. He was happy to pass them back. School never found out about him until he started taking up a collection on the bus. He said, "Now, you kids, you got a little extra lunch money. I can see it. You got dimes and quarters. Now, Jimmy needs a little help from you. I'd help you if I could, but I need a little help from you." He passed the hat back there. He said, "Don't tell anybody now." Well, we didn't, because we knew that if Jimmy passed you and didn't stop for you, you'd have to walk to school, and it would be your fault. So we put the money in the hat until finally somebody reported him. They fired him. They gave him a week's notice. That last week was pretty interesting. Jimmy was drinking directly from the flavoring. It's big snow that week. Bus was all over the road. And on the last day of work, it was a Friday, he didn't even bother heading for town. He said, "I'm taking you kids for a ride." He drove. We didn't know where we were. Way out in the country somewhere. Then he got off the highway, and then he drove off onto dirt roads. Girls in the back were crying. We didn't know what was going to happen. He drove down this long road and out onto the ice over a frozen lake, a big lake. We drove way out in the middle, and there we ran out of gas. And the bus sat. Jimmy went off to take a leak. We sat there, girls crying. We boys opened the emergency door in the back, which set a buzzer off under the dashboard, and that infuriated Jimmy. He came stalking in. He reached under. He ripped out the wires. He opened up the hood. He reached, ripped off the air filter, pulled out the spark plugs, the wiring, threw them as far as he could, and that seemed to exhaust his anger. He sat down in the well where the door opens of the school bus. And he sat down there and he put his head in his hands. And he said, boy, this is just one of those days. Some days you're the bug, and some days you're the windshield. And he set off walking. We saw him disappear into the woods, and we walked the other way. We called the school. They sent a bus, and not much was said about it. This was back in the days when a lot was not said about a great deal. Things happened in my childhood that nowadays there'd be an investigation and a task force, and the whole system would be turned around counterclockwise because of this one thing that had happened. Somebody driving with their knees with a cigarette and a coffee cup and flavoring out of a bottle and magazines and rock and roll. The whole thing would have been changed, but back then nothing was said about it. It was just part of life. And you got a little glimpse into the life of adults. He wasn't so bad. Somebody told me he went off to college, straightened himself out, and went into educational administration, got an MS. I doubt that. He was just a boy who got drunk in the morning. It was just the sin of incompetence, not the worst sin compared to others. The sin of smugness and self-righteousness, which has always been strong back where I came from. People come down a little bit too hard on the truth. People who are humble in a little too ostentatious way. People who are compulsively repentant in ways that make you know that they don't mean it.